your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro.
55 seconds left in the penalty, a minute and 27 seconds left in regulation time. Boston 4, Montreal 3. Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur.
The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
You're in the ball!
Sports entertainment like no other.
Rejoint, on lui fait perdre la rondelle, une passe devant. Et c'est le dégagement et ce sera la victoire des Canadiens. Coupe Stanley pour les Canadiens, leur 23e de l'histoire.
You found the dogs! John, you found the dogs! He found the dogs! And all together, they worked a young team to the top. And now, a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Brought to you by Energy Transportation Group. Driven to be different. 8.6 beer. Intense by nature. And Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to Locage. It's gonna be sick.
Marinaro on this Monday night. It is 10:01 p.m. Here I am, and we are live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter. And I'm seeing a lot of you commenting already, which is kind of cool that you're there and you're already there in pretty big numbers. Pretty awesome. It was 1 year ago today that the Montreal Canadiens relieved Marc Bergevin of his duties. 1 year ago today. And wow. There's so much to talk about because I saw earlier today on the Sick Podcast Twitter account that, one of the things we wrote was, you know what? Bergevin was relieved of his duties 1 year ago, right? Give us one word. Give us one word of what the last year has been like. And we're going to get to some of those answers, and we're going to get to them in just about a minute or two. Actually, maybe even a little bit later on. But I can tell you that Eric Engels of Sportsnet is our contributor pretty much every Monday night when the Montreal Canadiens don't play. And when they do play, well, we try and slot him in somewhere else because he's that good. The Sick Podcast brought to you in part by 8.6 Beer. Here you have it. These guys right over here. Intense by nature, the beer for those who follow their instinct and live their passions in order to make their mark. And, Team Canada, the men's national team at the World Cup, they had the intensity yesterday for probably about the first 30 minutes or so. But unfortunately, they didn't have much left after that because it looked like they gave everything they had in the first 30 minutes. And they just couldn't keep up with Croatia in the way they were passing around the ball. So later on tonight, if all goes well, John Lemniadis, former coach of the Montreal Impact, former player with the Montreal Impact, did represent Canada in the past. He's going to talk to us about his impressions of the Canadiens men's national team, who unfortunately, very unfortunately, have lost their first two games at the World Cup and have since been eliminated. The second team to be eliminated after Qatar. I see Kennedy Carvalho's on the chat on YouTube, and he says, how about Portugal? Yeah, how about that Cristiano Ronaldo? Pretending like it's him that he scored when the replay clearly shows you that he did not get ahead on it. Or did he? All depends on which angle you're looking at. And I'm wondering if a few people are doing Photoshop, yes or no. But all kidding aside, Portugal, very, very good. A couple of games in, they won both. And they have a really, really good team. You know what? They've never won the World Cup, and I'd be happy if they do. And you know what? I'd be happy if Argentina wins it. I'd be happy if England wins it. And Brazil is the team that I really like watching play the most. I enjoy Brazil a lot. I enjoy Spain a lot too. But I have to tell you, Brazil is already at 5 stars, and the Italian national team is at 4. And if Brazil wins again, they're going to go to 6. So part of me doesn't want Brazil to win, but they do play the beautiful game beautifully. I really enjoy watching them. The Sick Podcast brought to you in part by Lacage. If the last time you went to Lacage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you go back to Lacage. The menu will surprise you. And I can tell you that I was at Lacage earlier today, Lacage de Carry, en route des Jockeys. As a matter of fact, I was with my buddies Agnello and Sammy back at Master Control with Joey DiCaprio, Matt O'Han, who brings you the Sick Podcast every Friday night, same time, same place. And Chris from, Sports Cards La Tornade, Chris Latournade in Vaudreuil-Dorion, he was there as well. We had a really good time. Tony, I need a haircut. Tell me who your barber is. As a matter of fact, I don't know if James is being sarcastic on the chat or not, but I cut it myself this time around. You can probably see that because I went way too short on the sides, kept it a little bit longer. I wanted a little bit of a mushroom style type of thing. And as you can see, I got a little bit carried away. I don't know. Every now and then I just get in those moods where my hair's a little bit long and I say, you know what? I'm going to cut my hair. And I do. And then my kids look at me and say, Dad, you screwed it up. You need to go see the barber. And that's exactly what happens. Very disappointing, claiming Ronaldo was trying to get credit for a goal he didn't score. Do you watch soccer? If you do, you would recognize his iconic goal celebration. I didn't see it. Don't be a hater. This coming in from Kennedy. I'm not so sure if he's talking to me or somebody else, but anyway, it's okay, Kennedy. We're being half serious, but half joking at the same time. We do want Portugal to win, Kennedy, because we know if they don't, could you imagine if Portugal doesn't win and Argentina wins? Poor Kennedy's going to get sick. We wouldn't want that to happen. It's bad enough one of them is running away with the Ballon d'Ors. All kidding aside, they're the two best players ever. Let's enjoy them, all right? And let's enjoy the Sick Podcast. And it's brought to you in part by Energy Transportation Group. And Energy Transportation Group, of course, these guys are absolutely fantastic. They're an asset-based 3PL provider offering outstanding service at incredible rates, serving all of North America. Energy Transportation Group offers full-service logistics support from warehousing, customs brokerage, and transportation consulting. Energy Transportation Group has you covered. They're a great place to work, too, by the way. My boys there, Mike Cinquino and Sean Gerard. Without further ado, I think we have Eric. We do. Let's go to him right now. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing good, Tony. How are you?
Very, very good. While I was here in Montreal, based on what I saw on social media and Instagram and Facebook, and I don't know if you put it on Twitter. I think it was Instagram and Facebook, eh? Do you leave all the personal stuff for Instagram and Facebook? Is that what you do?
Typically, yeah. I was in Chicago. It was a great time. Really lovely weather there. Great food. Good time.
Yeah. And it looked like you had real good company, and it looked like, you were eating really, really good food because I saw some of those pictures and I said, looks like Eric is having a great time. So good for you, bud. I've been to Chicago before, albeit very unfortunately only once. I really enjoyed my stay there. I went for a soccer convention, as a matter of fact. I think it lasted about 3 days. I spent 3 days there. And one of my favorite spots is in Chicago, and that's Italy. You can find one in New York, and you can find one in Los Angeles. And if I've heard correctly, I believe there's one in Toronto, too. Very unfortunately, there's not one in Montreal. Anyway, not even sure why I'm giving them a plug, considering that they don't sponsor the podcast.
I think it's the second time you've done it.
But
I think it's the second time you plugged Italy. I think you should open it yourself in Montreal.
You know what?
The pioneer that brings Italy to Montreal. Call Mario Batali and Lydia Bastianic and get going.
I'm not going to lie to you. I like that place a lot. All right. Okay. It was 1 year ago today that, and I'll never forget it because it's funny. We were having an event with the Sick Podcast at Le Casual Sport de Carrie. And we were there, and the Canadiens were playing a Saturday night game in Pittsburgh. And we got word on the broadcast. We had heard it right before the game started, but we got word again on the broadcast that, there was word, I think, at around game time or right before, that Jeff Gorton was hired by the Montreal Canadiens. So we're wondering what's going on. And then we found out that Marc Bergevin was relieved of his duties. So one of the things I want to do tonight, and I touched on it earlier with Jean-Charles Lajoie at GC on TVA Sports, is I want to talk about what Marc Bergevin left behind to the management group of Gordon and Hughes. Because as you know, Eric, Marc Bergevin said on more than one occasion, I'm not going to be here forever, but when I'm going to be gone, I want to leave the Montreal Canadiens in a good situation for whoever inherits the team, whoever takes over, that, it's going to be a good situation. So I'd like to take a look at some of the good, some of the bad, some of the not so good, not so bad, and in the end, with you, see if we can agree as to whether or not Marc Bergevin left the Montreal Canadiens in a good situation, yes or no, or so-so. Good?
Okay. I
Okay.
follow.
So here's a graphic that my boy Mathieu Bedard came up with and the good people at TVA Sports earlier this evening. C'est en français, but it's okay. I think everyone will understand. Marc Bergevin's good moves. Let's bring up that graphic. There you have it. L'héritage de Marc Bergevin. Les points positifs un an plus tard. La transaction pour acquérir Nick Suzuki. Le contrat à Nick Suzuki. La sélection de Cole Caulfield au repêchage. Jeune défense, Gouli, Harris, Struble, Mailloux. Le duo, Allen, Montembeault. Oh, and by the way, we should add Jacky. That's not on the list. That is a young defenseman there. Okay, so when the trade was done, Max Pacioretty for Thomas Tatar, Nick Suzuki, and a third or a draft pick. I think it was a third round, which ended up being Matthias Norlinder. Correct me if I'm wrong, whether it was a second round or a third round. What did you think of the trade at the time, Eric?
At the time, I thought the trade was a miracle. Honestly, Pacioretty was on the market for a very long time with a trade request into the Canadiens. It was a situation where Marc Bergevin was dealing from a position of weakness, albeit with an established 30-goal scorer in the league, and one due a contract within a year of being traded. It was a tough situation. Most GMs in that type of situation feel cornered. And as my buddy Elliot Friedman always likes to say, you know, when you're in that type of situation, you don't get thrown life preservers, you get thrown anchors by your colleagues in the GM world. And I think I remember writing that trade was made the day of the golf tournament. And I remember writing that day that
Pardon me, Eric, if I can, the night before the golf tournament.
The night before the golf tournament?
Yeah, it was made.
I feel like it broke at 8:30 in the morning.
No, if I can, Eric, you might be right there, but if I can, the golf tournament was around 9:00 on a Monday morning, correct?
Yeah.
And on a Sunday late afternoon, Pacioretty was skating at Pierrefonds Quatre Glaces, and I believe his wife or someone went over to whisper in his ear, the deal is about to get done with Vegas. And so the deal was in the works, but by the time it actually became official, I think it was in the wee hours of the morning, but the deal was almost a fait accompli on the Sunday late afternoon, made official early Monday morning, late Sunday night, early Monday morning. But yeah, you know what? There was no way, Eric, that they were going to do that golf tournament and Max Pacioretty was going to be their captain at that golf tournament, because Pacioretty was not going to be the captain that season. Marc Bergevin had decided it was going to be Shea Weber. And,
it was such an incredibly awkward and weird situation, especially with Pacioretty having his own golf tournament, I think like a month prior to that, and how awkward that was.
Remember that?
Saw that.
Remember when Marc Bergevin showed up with Jeff Molson?
Yeah, they were invited, right? Like he was still a member of the team.
Well, what was even more awkward, if I can, Eric, were you at that golf tournament?
Yes, I was. I was there for sure.
Yeah. Were you at the supper after?
Thankfully, no.
You were not there. You obviously heard about it, right?
You're gonna have to refresh my memory. It's slowly coming. There's so much, Tony. Not to go on a whole side tangent here.
Yeah.
But when I think about the last 3 years of the Montreal Canadiens and the things that happened, it is hard to remember everything because so much was packed into it and it was so dramatic. And with the pandemic on top of it, it was honestly a really stressful time as a reporter.
Yeah.
With all that, it was really crazy, one thing after the next. And we could talk about that a bit later. It was funny because I was having dinner with Elliot last night. He was in town in Montreal.
Oh, really? Damn, I would have liked to have seen him.
We were talking about what's happening in Vancouver right now. And I said to him, I don't know what it is about the Canadian marketplace, and this is probably unique in hockey and Canadian markets, but when that snowball starts rolling downhill, it becomes like an avalanche. And it just seems like just when you think it can't get any more dramatic. Something else happens that adds that much more snow to that ball. And it's I lived it. You lived it. We all lived it in Montreal over the 3 years. And with the pandemic getting locked in and everything that happened with that, I was so burnt by the end of all of it that when you ask me if I remember what happened at a supper at Max Pacioretty's golf tournament before he got traded, it's a blur. I know there's something, but it's a blur for me because it was just such an insane time.
Eric, for those watching right now on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter Live, and by the way, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, please do so. It's absolutely free. And it's great because you can turn your notifications on, and every time we go live, you'll be notified. Okay, it's pretty cool. But let me see if I can go through. We got some good stuff for all you watching tonight. Okay, because that golf tournament, if memory serves me well, so let's put things in context, right? Max Pacioretty was represented previously before his last agent was Pat Brisson. Before Pat Brisson, he had another agent, which was his agent throughout his hockey in the United States. And
that was Matt Cater, I think.
No, I don't think it was
Alex Shaw.
It was Alex Shaw.
Okay.
It was Alex Shaw, and he's with Alex Shaw. And
we're going with that. I'm like having these memory problems, and we're going way back.
Yeah. So he goes from Alex Shaw, he goes to Pat Brisson. And, when Marc Bergevin was the GM of the Canadiens, there were several players that were represented by Pat Brisson, and David Desharnais was one of them, that it seems like the negotiation went pretty smoothly. Okay. We all know that Marc Bergevin has a great relationship with Pat Brisson, right? They're like this. And Pacioretty switched to Pat Brisson, probably like others, saying, you know what? He's got a real good relationship with the general manager. This could serve me well, and it could probably make negotiations a little bit easier and a little bit smoother.
That and because he had that 6-year, $4.5 million annual average salary that proved to be one of the best value contracts in the league, which is never
correct.
What you want being said about you as a player that's scoring over 30 goals a year and probably worth a lot more than that. But go ahead.
His agent told him to sign that deal, and I believe it was following the concussion, and there was a lot of uncertainty too with Pacioretty. So I think everyone wanted to sign it. There were factors. So he goes to Pat Brisson, but then at one point, not
at one point at the draft. Now my memory is coming in pretty good. He gets traded to the Los Angeles Kings.
Yes, he gets traded to the Los Angeles Kings. He doesn't want to go to Los Angeles. Correct, Eric. But I think Pat Brisson was telling him to go, right? So Brisson kind of...
Well, this deal, the trade to LA also was made with a contract offer on the table that Pacioretty didn't want to sign. It was too rushed. Like the deal was contingent on him signing that deal. So I think that was probably a factor in what happened there and why he ends up making a change in the end.
He ends up making a change.
He felt like they were potentially trying to make him do something that wouldn't be in his best interest.
Yeah. He's probably wondering, hey, okay, perfect. Let's leave it at that. Okay. And so he ends up changing agents, and he ends up talking with Alan Walsh that weekend, right? He ends up talking with Alan. They hit it off, and boom, an agent change is made. He leaves Pat Brisson. He goes to Alan Walsh. Alan Walsh has a conversation with Pacioretty. Listen, what happened? There's word that you requested a trade, this, that. Did you or didn't you? We still don't know the whole story, but it seems like at one point there was a discussion between Pacioretty and Bergevin, which got a little heated. And it went something like, you know what? You want out? If you want out, tell me you want out. You want out? Yeah. Okay. Well, if you don't want me here, trade me. I want out. And then all of a sudden, that
was the official version, was that I think he stuck to the idea that he had never made a formal trade request, but that a conversation had gone south, and he had said, if you want to trade me, then trade me. Whatever it was. We're rehashing this history. It wasn't a good chapter for either Marc Bergevin or Max Pacioretty. And go ahead, Tony.
Put it this way: if you hear the story from Pacioretty's people, you know what? They'll tell you that Bergevin wanted to trade Pacioretty, and at one point he forced Pacioretty into saying, "Okay, you know what? If you don't want me, trade me." And if you hear it from Bergevin's people, the story will be that Pacioretty went in and asked for a trade. Okay.
Yeah, in November, I think, of that season.
Yeah. So, by the way, in November of that season, I go on the radio and I say Max Pacioretty is going to get traded, and I don't know when he's going to get traded, but I tell you, there will not be a new contract. He will not be back. He will not be the captain of this team next year. And when it's going to happen, I don't know, but I can tell you right now, he's not going to be the captain of the Montreal Canadiens come golf tournament. I had a great relationship with Pacioretty. He never talked to me again. He never digested the fact that I went on the radio and I said that Max Pacioretty was going to get traded. He wasn't really happy with me. Max is nothing personal. The information I was given was that you were going to be traded, and you were. And the information I was given is, come golf tournament, there's going to be a new captain, and it wasn't you. And then you were traded the day before the golf tournament. I mean, that's the way it went down. Anyway, it is what it is. It's too bad. Max is a good guy, but he lets a lot of things get to him. Now,
so what happened at the dinner?
So correct. So prior to that, at the golf tournament,
at his golf tournament,
at his golf tournament, he had invited Bergevin. I believe he had invited Jeff Molson as well. I know Pacioretty has. We were hearing from the Pacioretty camp at the time that the Canadiens had not got back to him, and they were waiting for an answer and waiting for an answer and waiting for an answer. Pacioretty and Bergevin weren't on great terms at the time, but everybody knew that if Bergevin doesn't show up, he's not going to look good, right? So Bergevin shows up to the golf tournament, gives Max Pacioretty a handshake for the cameras that looked extremely uncomfortable. You remember that handshake?
It was very awkward. I was right there.
Yeah. It was very awkward.
Very awkward moment. But anyways, moving past that.
Yeah.
What happened at dinner?
There's another story.
Tony.
There's another story before the dinner. This is really, you remember when they're all lining up to take a picture and Jonathan Drouin goes behind Pacioretty and puts his shoulder into him type of thing, because I you don't remember that? Remember that?
I missed
it.
it.
I think there was a message that when Bergevin takes pictures, he brushes up next to you and he kind of imposes himself and stuff like that. I don't remember the exact conversation, but Paolo Presti of Presti Homes, who built Max Pacioretty's home while he was here in Montreal, is very, very close to Max Pacioretty, right? He's the godfather to Pacioretty's kids. If I understand correctly, Pacioretty is the godfathers to Paolo's kids. They're like this, okay? Very good friends. Paolo Presti is a good man. And Paolo Presti, I believe, was sitting at the table with Jeff Molson, and I believe he was sitting at the table with Alan Walsh. Marc Bergevin was sitting at another table further from the stage. Paolo Presti delivers a speech that night, and he delivers a speech that, Max really wants to stay in Montreal, and Max should be staying in Montreal, and Max can't be traded. Look, I don't know word for word and stuff like that. I wasn't at the supper. I got word right after it that, something like this went down, but I was told that it was like, wow, did he just say what he said in front of Jeff Molson and in front of Marc Bergevin? And, that was it. That's the way it went down. And as much as, Alan Walsh, Alan tried to get Pacioretty and Bergevin and Molson and everyone back on the same page to say, hey, Max loves it in Montreal. I mean, let's work this out. But Marc Bergevin had made up his mind. He was moving on from Max Pacioretty, and there was going to be a new captain of the team, and it was going to be Shea Weber.
In the end, it worked out really well for both teams. And I thought on the day that the trade was made, or at least officialized, which was about a half an hour before I wrote it up, I wrote that day that this is a trade that looks great right now for the Canadiens and is only going to look better moving forward. And at the time, we thought Thomas Tatar was just to throw into the deal to make the money work. And what he had produced in his first 2 years in Montreal made that deal a slam dunk home run and one of the best ones that Marc Bergevin made while he was here. And on Max Pacioretty's end of it, he was liberated going to Vegas. There was a weight that lifted off of him. It was such a difficult situation for him to be in over his last year in Montreal. The pressure was too much. It would have been too much for anybody to handle. It was specifically hard for him to handle as someone who cared. If Max Pacioretty was guilty of anything in Montreal, it was caring too much.
He did
everything.
He took it very personally.
About
very
what
personally.
you had to say, or what I had to say, about what the fans had to say, about what anybody had to say, and how much he cared about producing on a nightly basis. I always respected Max for that. I always wished that he could have, alleviated himself of that burden and just been a bit more free. But he got to Vegas and he was free. And I'll tell you, I don't know if I don't think it was the first year that he was there, but the second year he was there, he played the best hockey of his career. I mean, he was unbelievable. And so that deal looked pretty good on both ends. It will never look as good for Vegas, especially in the aftermath with Pacioretty becoming a cap casualty and another injury weighing him down, and he's in Carolina now.
Yeah.
But what it looks like for Montreal with what Nick Suzuki has become, and even Marc Bergevin said, they knew that Nick, he said on the day that deal was made, that Nick was the key to the deal. But to see Nick, he never knew that Nick would become what he did in that playoff run in Guelph, and then coming up to the Canadiens and going from fourth liner to second liner to now what he is. I think that is, if it's not the greatest legacy move of Marc Bergevin in Montreal, and there's a couple of them, whether it's Caden Gooley or however you look at it, that trade looked really good the day that it was made, and it looks that much better right now.
The talk is that the guy that he wanted in the deal was Cody Glass, and that didn't go through. And he ends up getting Nick Suzuki, which he saw play in the playoffs with Owen Sound. And Trevor Timmons had good intel on Nick Suzuki as well, because obviously he didn't draft him his draft year, but he's a player that he knew about because he watched him playing his junior hockey, especially in the Ontario Hockey League. I mean, Trevor lives in Ottawa or close to it. But so look, that's a great deal. Thomas Tatar, by the way, should be noted, for 3 seasons played on a line with Phil Deneau and Brendan Gallagher. And from a Corsi perspective, I mean, they were one of the top 7 or 8 lines in hockey.
Oh, even higher than that. At 5-on-5, they were one of the best lines in hockey, and specifically over the first 2 years. And Marc Bergevin's deal for Philip Deneau is in my mind, it's outside of the Jeff Petrie trade, it's got to be the best trade he made. I remember we were in San Jose or Anaheim, I think, for trade deadline. That trade deadline, the Canadiens had a miserable year. They were terrible, and he trades Weiss and Fleischmann for Deneau and
Romanov.
He does, and he's exhausted at this point, right? Like he's been through the ringer. He's done all the interviews outside in Anaheim, and I remember did a one-on-one with him for Sportsnet. He looked weathered. He had, I think, the goatee and the long beard going, and finally, this interview wraps up, and he looks at me. He goes, "You're going to see, we got a real one. We got a real one with this kid who's coming. You'll see." And that trade, Philip Deneau was unbelievable in Montreal. And obviously, if you look back on Marc Bergevin's legacy, and we're talking about the good and the bad, how Phil Deneau ended up leaving Montreal is part of the worst. It's really part of the worst of what happened with Marc Bergevin here. From them going to Matthias Brunet and talking about what Deneau had turned down in a contract at a time where he was struggling to score and eating it from all sides, media, fans alike.
Hold on a second. Who went to Matthias Brunet?
Well, I don't know. I can't say with any certainty, but
there was a leak. There was a leak to Matthias Brunet.
There were two sides who had intimate details of whatever the negotiations were. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't Philip Deneau going to Matthias Brunet and telling him, hey, by the way, we turned down a 6-year offer from the Canadiens in September.
At $5 million. So there was a Brunet article, Matthias Brunet in La Presse newspaper. Throughout this time, the French media in particular, they're really upset that Phil Deneau wasn't given a contract extension, right? And that his negotiations weren't going well because they were like, oh my God, he's a gut chez nous and you can't lose him and all that stuff. So all of a sudden, there's an article in La Presse and Matthias Brunet says, hold on a second here. Phil Deneau was offered a 6-year deal at $5 million a year, and he turned it down. And then all of a sudden, Deneau got a lot of heat from everyone and from the fan base saying, how could you turn that down deal? That was a real good deal. Now, Deneau's side didn't want to comment, but they denied the accuracy of that. I had Stéphane Fizet, who's one of Deneau's agents, on later on in the year. And what he told me was, I believe it was him that told me. I believe it was, but it wasn't a 6-year offer, but it was a 5-year offer. So, according to Deneau's camp, it was a 5-year times $5 million. And in the end, he ended up getting 6 years times 5.5 by the Los Angeles Kings.
Whatever it was, Deneau was asked about it directly and never denied the fact that he turned down a contract offer from the Canadiens. And I can't say for sure that whether it was Marc Bergevin or Paul Wilson or somebody high up in the Canadian staff who leaked this information at a time where Deneau was struggling the most he ever has in his career.
Yeah.
But if you were Deneau in that moment, and that it turned him into the bad guy. His goalless drought went on for a number of days beyond that, and every time a game would go by without him scoring, people would say, do you believe this clown turned down this? He turned him into the bad guy. And if you know Phil Deneau, he's one of the best guys you'll ever meet. He's a wonderful, good human being who cared so much about the Canadiens and bled for the team. And it was business, but I thought it was bad business. It was bad business, and they lost Philip Deneau right there.
But I'll tell you what didn't help.
No matter what they would have come to him with at that time, they had lost him with that whole situation.
Yeah.
So that was part of the. And you go through my record, Tony. Like, I have given Marc Bergevin a ton of credit.
Yes.
For the things that he did. As GM of the Canadiens, I thought he made a lot of great moves. And the summer that he had, the year that I think it was that they went to the Stanley Cup final, and
that offseason was great.
Lou Lamoriello won the GM of the year, and there is no way that he should have won it over Marc Bergevin in my mind. Like, what Marc Bergevin did was turn the Canadiens into a team that if they made the playoffs, they would absolutely do damage. And anybody who understood it was saying it throughout the season.
Yeah, I believe he acquired Joel Edmondson. I believe he acquired Jake Allen. I believe he acquired Tyler Toffoli.
Josh Anderson.
There's a lot of guys that he acquired. No, you're right about that. But he
had the biggest impact on his team. Corey Perry, Eric Stahl. He had the biggest impact on his team doing what it did, and that is voted on after the second round of the playoffs. And there was no question in my mind that he got robbed that year. He should have been GM of the year, which would have made his story all that much more compelling, because I think he was losing his job no matter what when he did a year ago today. But yeah, I look back at the Pacioretty trade. I look at the Deneau trade. Those are huge things. The Jeff Petrie trade, I understand the big question is what he left behind. So, Deneau and Petrie are gone, and now Mike Matheson is here.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of outlook, but there was a lot of things that Marc Bergevin did well. And that thing that happened with Deneau at that early juncture of the season, that was one of the worst things, I think.
That year they went to the Cup final. By the way, John Merrill doesn't get talked about a lot, but I thought he was a pretty good depth acquisition at the time. A shout out to Playground. They have over 600 machines, poker tournaments, and playground casino games, daily promotions, unmatched customer service. Why go anywhere else? Located just over the Mercier Bridge, only minutes from downtown Montreal. It is Playground. All right, okay. I
think Eric Gustafsson scored a key goal also.
He did.
In the playoffs. So
what didn't help Deneau at the time too is when Matthias Brunet comes out with that article in the press, you're reading that and you're saying Tyler Toffoli took a 4-year deal below value at $4.25 million a year to play for the Canadiens, and Danault's going to refuse 6 times 5. And so like you said, a lot of people turned on Danault because they're like, why would he, Toffoli took less to come to Montreal. If Danault's from here, from the province of Quebec, why wouldn't he take maybe a little bit less to stay here?
Well, and we all know now, in retrospect, and Phil explained himself quite well. He wasn't sure about how he was being viewed. All the talk was about his role being relegated with the rise of Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Nick Suzuki in the bubble. I think a lot of us knew that Phil was way too important to the team, and that clearly Marc Bergevin did. Otherwise, he never would have made the offer that he did to him, in September, even before I think Brendan Gallagher got an offer to return to the Canadiens. So,
yeah,
they knew how important Phil Danault was. The situation got out of hand. They were clearly insulted by the fact that he turned down that deal.
Yeah.
You talk about Tyler Toffoli, that's market dynamics within the summer when he was actually a free agent, whereas Phil, still had a year left under contract and had every reason to kind of wait and see how he was going to be used by the coaching staff before deciding what he was going to do. Because I don't think he was interested in getting into a long-term deal that would see him move down the lineup to a role that he had already worked his way up to and deserved and was coming into his prime. And look, it's funny how things work out because it was no fluke that he went to Los Angeles. Now, I never, if you had asked me if I thought Phil Danault was capable of scoring 28 goals, is that what he had last year?
It was an insane season. It's a career year.
I never with his shot would have suggested that would be possible.
Yeah.
I did think absolutely he would be a very valuable contributor to the Los Angeles Kings.
He's a good player. It's funny, Eric, because I remember
that was really something.
I remember saying if you're giving Toffoli 4 years at 4.25, you cannot give Phil Danault 6 years at 5.5. Anyway, I like Phil Danault. Can we come back
to Suzuki for a sec, Tony?
Yes, I will, but I just want to say Danault wasn't very happy. I said that, and he refused my request to come on the podcast as well ever since. He hasn't been very happy with me. Go back to Suzuki.
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? You can't please everyone. I can't even please my wife. Imagine.
What year was Nick Suzuki drafted?
Nick Suzuki was drafted, what was it, 4 years ago? He was drafted 2018 at 13th overall. Was that it? I'm going to look it up right now, by the way.
It's not 2018.
It's 2017, 13th overall. So 1 year before, 13 overall. Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
2017 NHL draft.
13th overall. Nico Hischier, Nolan Patrick, Miro Heiskanen, and Cale Makar, and Elias Pettersson were the top 5.
I'm asking because I was just looking at it, 13 Vegas. Like, how many of these players does he go ahead of now?
Yeah, no, that's by the way, look, Cody Glass was their pick at number 6 overall. And okay, so how many players does he go ahead of?
If this is being redone, it's Makar.
Yes. It's Makar number 1.
Makar, Hischier, Heiskanen, Pettersson, Suzuki. Suzuki, and then you've got lower down, you got Josh Norris, and
I'm gonna beg to
higher
differ.
Up. You've got Martin Nikash.
Okay, I'm gonna beg to differ. You said Makar, Hischier, Heiskanen, Pettersson. I think Pettersson is probably ahead of Hischier and Heiskanen, but that's a very.
Oh no, man.
Are
you seeing what Hischier is doing right now?
Hishier's on fire this year. Hishier's on fire.
Hischier has come into his own. He's ready to go.
Yeah, Hishier's
very unfortunate what happened to Nolan Patrick, clearly.
Yeah, I was just taking a look at points per game for what they've done up until now. Okay, because up until now, Elias Pettersson has almost a point per game. But Nico Hischier this year is another level good. He's another level good.
He's more complete. Josh Norris and Nick Suzuki move way up that draft class.
Yeah.
So that is, talk about what I thought about that deal the day it was made.
Yeah.
Was that I thought it was a great deal the day it was made, and a deal that was only going to get better with every day that passed. And wow, couldn't have imagined it would be this good, but it's a pretty incredible trade for Montreal.
Yeah. There's another player that was where is he? I'm trying to find him. Robert Thomas is a pretty good pick.
I'd move him up
and at 20. And Jason Robertson, Dallas, 39.
Oh, well, move him up to number 3, like maybe number 2, actually.
Jason Robertson,
Jason
39th
Robertson is
pick
keeping
overall.
pace. He's keeping pace with Connor McDavid, playing 5 minutes less a night.
He's got 19 goals and 36 points in 23 games.
Well, there you go.
6'3", 200-pound left winger.
5 minutes
Unbelievable.
less on average than Connor McDavid.
Can we bring back up the chart for a second if we can? So look, the Suzuki trade is obviously a great trade. The Suzuki contract, 8 years times 7.875, I believe it was, or something like that. Dom Lucian of The Athletic, less than a year ago, called it the 9th worst contract given in the National Hockey League. I think Dom wants a mulligan on that one.
Maybe. I don't know why he did his work looking based on, I guess it's part of the deal. You look at last year and then make your projections. I think we could all see that there's been a steady rise for Nick Suzuki throughout his career, that he was going to get to another level of this year as a 23-year-old in the league, especially with the way he closed out the second half of last year. I think, Dom and several other of the analysts are looking at Suzuki's shooting percentage and saying, don't worry, we'll be right in the end. But I think we all know that with the cap going up and where Suzuki's contract got done, that's a great legacy move for Marc Bergevin. And I'm sure Jeff Gordon and Ken Hughes are very thankful for what that deal looks like now. I also think that you look at Caden Gooley on that list with the young defenseman. He should probably be a point on his own, because I remember the reaction of Canadiens fans and talking about the limited potential offensive potential of Caden Gooley and saying, oh, I don't know if this is a good pick. And this kid at 20-year-old jumps into the NHL and has not only played the part of a number one defenseman, but has looked completely in his place in that role. I'm not saying that he's already there, but it won't be long before he gets there and becomes a really good number one defenseman. And that is a hell of a pick that they made.
Let's bring back up the chart if we can with the good moves. We'll go through it a lot quicker than we did, but we had some really good stories to share. And I think everyone watching probably liked them. Comment sick and hit the like button if you like what we had to say and are enjoying the podcast. Obviously, drafting Cole Caulfield at 15th overall a couple of years later, that's gone really well.
That was the easiest move they had to make.
Yeah,
drafting right in their laps.
Drafting Gooley, Harris, Struble, and through controversy, Logan Mailloux. I think that's going to prove to be.
We're going to agree. We're going to agree that wasn't a good move at the time, and hopefully it
wasn't a good move.
Becoming a much better person.
I think we can. I think we can say that based on the way he's played this year for London and the type of team they are with him compared to the type of team that they are without him, that he's going to end up helping this blue line. One day going forward.
We'll see. I hope he can help himself and become a much,
that goes without saying.
He's made a lot of progress as a human being, because that was a disastrous decision at the time. And we don't have enough evidence to speak to the idea that it's a good one as of today. But he looks like he's going to be a good hockey player, which is why they chose him and ignored all that stuff to begin with. And we'll see if it ends up being in the NHL.
All right. The goaltending duo of Allen and Montembeault, which were both acquired by Marc Bergevin. Allen was a trade and then signed, and Montembeault was off waivers. Look, they're not the two best goalies in the world. They're not the two worst, but for a team that's rebuilding, considering what you got them that under, in terms of salary, they're decent goalies that he left the duo of Gordon and Hughes with, don't you think?
It was work by default. If I was making this chart myself, I would have included that, the guys that were traded last year by Gordon and Hughes were still legacy moves from Marc Bergevin, right? They were able to get a great haul for Ben Chirot, for
You're right.
Another one for Tyler Toffoli, and especially one for Arturi Lehkonen. I think it's stretching it, putting the goaltending duo of Allen. I thought Allen was a great move.
Yeah,
but Montembeault was picked up because they like it. They have to get a goalie in. It's looking good now today.
It's funny you say that, because when I spoke with Matthew earlier today at TVA, I said, Matthew, I want you to do 3 charts, right? Good moves, bad moves, and the moves. Let's also do a chart for the players he traded away last year, because they draft Arturi Lehkonen. They're able to get Justin Barron and a pick for Arturi Lehkonen. They trade for Brett Kulak, and they're able to get an asset for Brett Kulak. They sign Tyler Toffoli, and they're able to get a first for Toffoli. And they sign and a prospect. I think it was Heineman that they got for Toffoli. Correct me if I'm wrong. And they signed Ben Sherratt 3 years, $10.5 million. And then they end up extending him, I think, but they end up getting a first. And was it Ty Smolanic they got for Sherratt, I believe? So I said, make a chart with those guys on it. And you were right on that. So good on you, Eric. How about some bad moves? Let's bring some of them up in the chart. The signing of Carl Osner, since bought out, acquiring Mike Hoffman or signing Mike Hoffman, the contract to Brendan Gallagher, which, from a cap perspective, it's hurt, but we'll talk about that in a second. The trade to acquire and the contract given to Jonathan Drouin right on the spot, 6 years, $33 million. The drafting of Jesperi Kotkaniemi. I mean, if you end up drafting another player, maybe that player is still here, maybe not. And the contracts, that came with Shea Weber and Carey Price that he gave to them, mind you, they're on long-term injury reserve, and they don't have to really deal with that. So your thoughts on what's up on the screen here?
You take the first one off this list, I would defend every move that was made here.
Okay.
I know it's crazy to hear, but it's I would actually defend every move that was made, because it's very easy to look back in hindsight and talk about it this way.
You're right.
But let's take the Drouin trade, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The Canadiens, everyone forgets the context of that. The Canadiens
were losing Radulov.
No.
Okay.
Before that happened, the Canadiens still had Radulov in the fold when they made that trade. Let's not talk about them losing him, because they were negotiating with Radulov. It was a hard negotiation, but they were negotiating with him. But beyond that, they came out of a series where they were the fourth best. They came out of a season where they were the fourth best defensive team in the league. They had Carey Price in nets. They scored 11 goals in 6 games, and Price put up a .937 save percentage or whatever it was. And the only guy who produced was Radulov.
Yeah.
The other guy who was dynamic but didn't produce was Lehkonen. They desperately needed some offensive punch. Andrei Markov and Alex Radulov were still in the fold when they traded for Jonathan Drouin. They did not want to give up Mikhail Sergachev. They knew that Mikhail Sergachev was going to be a really good player, but they desperately needed a dynamic offensive producer. And when Drouin was traded for in Montreal, he'd come off a 14-point in 17 playoff game performance, was peaking on his way upwards,
54 points with Tampa in that regular season too.
We all saw what he was in junior. He was chosen 3rd overall for a reason. If there was a mistake that was made with Drouin, and even in hindsight, it's the only way you can argue it, because at the time I thought it was a good move too, was putting him at center right away. I felt Drouin had the ability as a centerman to make players around him better. It was a really difficult position that he was put in. He came to Montreal. I remember him doing interviews out on the streets with fans, and someone saying, not even recognizing they were talking to Jonathan Drouin, and them saying he's going to score 50 goals this year. It was a tough spot. It's a horrible trade in hindsight.
Yeah.
But the day it was made,
the
Canadiens were adding Jonathan Drouin to a team that had Alex Radulov and needed another player that could make players around him better. And Jonathan Drouin was trending that way. I know how it ended up. I know they were in a tough negotiation. I know it looked like Radulov might be on his way out the door.
Yeah.
But things get tough in negotiations until you get to the final hour. And they were talking up until the final hour. And I reviewed all this with Marc Bergevin in a one-on-one interview. And we talked very openly and honestly about those situations with Markov. He played hardball with Markov and beat him down when he had conceded that he would be willing to take just 1 year. And he said, well, yeah, and then it's going to be this. All he wanted was, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. He didn't want to admit it was a mistake. He said, I think his response to me verbatim was he should have had an agent. And he's right about that. But look, when they traded for Jonathan Drouin, I remember going on the air, Tim and Sid, and saying, this is a good trade. They're giving up a really good player, the guy that they know is going to become a top 4 defenseman in this league and potentially even a top 2 defenseman. They desperately needed offense, and Jonathan Drouin looked like,
and they desperately needed a francophone star, and there were some empty seats.
That was another factor for sure.
There were some loges that were up for renewal, and they wanted to make sure that everyone was gonna re-up on their loges 5 years or 7 years or whatever it was. And if you had a Francophone star, and I have to tell you, that playoff year drawing was absolutely unbelievable for Tampa. The way you said 14 points in 17 games. I thought he was electric on the power play, especially that season. I said, this guy's one of the best power play players in the entire National Hockey League.
And he played
for
with heart. He got smoked by Thomas Hickey. He took one of the hardest hits I've ever seen in a playoff game.
Looked like a concussion.
Broke his nose, was bleeding on the bench, and never left the game, okay? So, like, I'm just saying, it's so easy to look at hindsight and, the fans, how could you do this and that? I don't remember any one of our colleagues writing the day that trade was made that it was a bad move. Like, I don't remember anybody, the guys who I respect the most, saying this is the wrong thing. Everyone acknowledged what they were giving up.
But Eric, if I can.
And earlier in the season, Tony, I want to tell you, they had a chance to make that trade and didn't want to trade Mikhail Sergachev. But when you go through a playoff run like they did, where the only thing between them and going deep into the playoffs the way they were built was scoring goals, they had to do something, and they did.
But I will say this, though, Eric, there were a lot of people that did not want to give Brendan Gallagher a contract extension of that amount. And there were a lot of people that when they saw the amount, everyone loves Gallagher, Eric, and I know you do, and I know you wrote a real nice article about what he did in the offseason and that he was going to be re-energized and he was going to be fresh. He was finally going to be injury-free, and he bench presses like 8,000 pounds.
Do you remember?
Everyone loves him, but a lot of people didn't like the contract when it was announced.
Because there was emotion involved in it, and it was an emotional decision. And I understand you pay for future potential versus what somebody has already done for you. You want to be able to pay much more for that than,
Well, the people that didn't like it.
Especially with players going into Brendan's age group.
Correct.
But I just want to go back.
Please.
I want to go back.
Go back.
Because Brendan signed his deal after the bubble. And what happened in the bubble? The guy tore his hip, kept playing. The guy breaks his jaw, and if he could have, if there weren't these quarantine issues and all that, he would have kept playing. He wanted to play that next game that they end up getting eliminated or whatever it is by Philadelphia. And those were two examples of how Brendan Gallagher was a complete warrior. And when it got, I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember the press conference, the Zoom conference that we did with Marc Bergevin?
When he got emotional.
On the day that Brendan Gallagher was signed, and why he got emotional. Because I asked him a question.
I
asked him a question.
So I think he almost said something like he's like a son or whatever, or this or that. But
no, I asked him a question. I said, Mark, did the optics that you didn't want Brendan to return and not getting out to be something public that you guys didn't want, like did the optics, because we all know that you wanted Brendan Gallagher and wanted to keep him, but did the optics being out there possibly make him feel that you didn't want him anymore, accelerate the process of getting him signed?
I hear you. I understand your question.
He could barely talk.
Yeah.
And said, he means a lot to me. He started crying, saying he means a lot to me.
He's very attached to Brendan Gallagher. But Eric,
Mark cared about his players a lot.
Yes.
Especially guys like Gallagher.
When he loved you, he loved you.
Gallagher did not. Marc Bergevin signed that deal knowing it was not going to be a good value deal, but it meant more to him to make Gallagher feel that he is absolutely appreciated for what he's done for the team. And it's hard to argue against Gallagher earning what he got. It's very easy to argue against the value of the contract being good.
Eric, that's all fine and dandy, and it's very honorable. But today, that contract is handcuffing the Canadiens.
No, I get it. I get it, Tony. I'm just saying.
I'm talking about the
very easy to argue against the value of the contract. It's very hard to argue against him earning it the way he played.
No one's arguing that he didn't earn it, because he was underpaid for many, many years before that at $3.75 million. So you know what? You average it out. He deserves all the money you're going to give him. Having said that, we're in a business. We're in a salary cap. And a lot of people were worried that the way Brendan played, that he was going to break down and he wasn't going to be able to replicate those numbers. And you know what? Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to. Here's hoping that he will. I believe he's got 3 goals up until this point. But look, everyone's pulling for Brendan Gallagher. Let's go back to the chart very quickly. Let's bring it back up, and so we'll wrap it up with Eric. My God, you've been on with us for like over 50 minutes. It's unbelievable. I can't believe this. I really appreciate it. The drafting of Kotkaniemi over guys. Look, draft.
I'll defend it.
You win
I'll
some, you lose
defend it.
some. Okay, defend it.
I'll defend it. I'll continue to defend it. I defended it all the way through, and I'm going to continue to defend it.
Defend it.
What was Brady Tkachuk's record coming into the NHL when he was drafted 4th overall? How many points did he put up at Boston?
Not a lot.
Like
not a lot. He was not a point producer at in
last time the Canadiens were 3rd overall was in 2000. Whenever they drafted Galchenyuk,
2012. Yeah, the draft took place was it in Pittsburgh?
They get screwed. The kid misses a year of hockey, comes into it. Neil Yakupov goes. The consensus next best player available to the Canadiens is Alex Galchenyuk. And anyways, I don't want to go back through Galchenyuk, but before that, it had been forever since the Canadiens had a top 3 pick. It had been decades before they had a top center in their lineup. And here comes this kid moving up the draft board by consensus. Like, look all around the league. There was a lot of people talking about how he might be the best centerman in the draft. If you are Montreal, after 25 years of not having a big, talented, versatile center in your lineup, do you pass on the opportunity to draft one when your GM for 8 years has been saying verbatim nonstop, you can't trade for them, you can't sign them, you have to draft them? I mean, they tried to move down in the draft. Arizona was behind them and were taking a center. They ended up with Barrett Hayton, so there was no move. If Arizona moves up, they take Kotkaniemi instead. There just wasn't, they knew that they were reaching a little, picking him a little higher than he likely would have gone.
So I'm happy to say
it's a tough position to be in. If I were them, I honestly think if they had passed on Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Jesperi Kotkaniemi goes somewhere else at 6th or 7th overall, and he spends a year more in Europe and comes over and plays 1 year in the AHL, he probably becomes the player we all thought he should have been in Montreal. He came into Montreal. His development was mishandled. That's very clear, and that's led him down the road where he is in Carolina.
Correct.
But in the moment, at the time, like Brady Tkachuk versus the Kotkaniemi thing, to me it's bullshit, the whole argument. Like
hold on a second. Hold on a second here.
Okay, you're gonna tell me Brady Tkachuk could have been a center too or something?
No. I'm not gonna tell you that. This is what I will tell you. I'm not a draft
expert. Quinn Hughes would have been pretty good.
I'm not a draft expert. I don't want to speak for you, but I will. I think it's safe. Like, you're not. There's a lot of people in the media that pretend that they're draft experts.
I'm not either.
When the draft comes around, they pretend like they've watched all these guys. The fact of the matter is that we're watching NHL games. We're not really watching that many junior hockey games. All right. Okay. Unless you own an independent scouting service. All right. But, a lot of people talk to a couple of scouts and they pretend like they actually know everything on all these players. I don't. Okay. I don't. I, like everyone else, placed a few calls, talked to a couple of people that I trust, yada, yada, yada. This is what I know. The day before the draft, I said on the air, it's documented, that I would draft Brady Tkachuk with the 3rd pick. Okay. And the reason why I said that I would draft Brady Tkachuk with the 3rd pick was, if you recall, yes, Jesperi Kotkaniemi started to make a lot of noise that draft week. But up until the last report before that, I think he was 17 or 18 on a lot of people's lists. And Brady Tkachuk was always everywhere between like 4 and 8 on like everyone's list. That's number one. Number two, it was actually 31 points in 40 games that he had at Boston College. It was only 8 goals, but it was 31 points in 40 games.
Okay.
He was coming off a real good season. We heard that his character was through the roof. We know that he had an older brother who, was well on his way.
We knew the pedigree. We knew he was going to be a good player. That was never a debate.
And every time the Canadiens end up drafting by position instead of drafting by best player available, there's, you could get it wrong. And now you can get it wrong if you go the other way around too. I understand that too. But I just thought
the question isn't
that Tkachuk was based on what I heard and on reports, if you average everything out, I just thought he was the safest pick to be an impact NHLer.
Fine.
Yeah.
Take you at your word. No problem. I'm sure you said it on the air.
I did.
The bottom line is the argument at the time was not Tkachuk versus Kotkaniemi. The argument was who is going to be, it was Zadina.
Yeah.
And who is going to be the consensus best centerman in this draft? And that was Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and that's why they picked him. And if they didn't that day, I can promise you one thing. There might have been somebody, you might have raised your hand and said, I love Brady Tkachuk, and I'm happy the Canadiens took him. You might have said, I would have taken Brady Tkachuk over Philip Zadina. You might have said, I would have taken Quinn Hughes over all of them. But I know one thing is 100% certain, and we'll never know for sure, but I know it. If they don't take the number one consensus center in that draft at the time, in the moment, at third overall, I'm sure that everybody would have flipped out about it after 25 years of not having somebody, after the GM talking ad nauseum about the fact that you cannot trade for these guys and you cannot sign them and you have to draft them. And they tried to trade down in the draft to do it at a position that made more sense. Anyways, like I said, the development was an issue.
You know what? It's really funny because in the end, they ended up getting their guy when they traded for Nick Suzuki, because look at him. He's become a number one centerman. Eric, in ending, and man, this has been a lot of fun, and I know appreciated by everyone watching on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Like, I always like talking to you, but I think this is one of the most enjoyable conversations we've had. I hope you liked it as much as I did. Do you think Marc Bergevin left the Canadiens in good hands, yes or no, to the duo of Gordon and Hughes?
Do I think he left them in good hands? I mean,
if you take a look at the players he acquired, minus some of the bad contracts he may have given out, I think you defended a lot of points. So I think the answer to that would be yes.
I'm looking for the bad move these guys have made. Honestly,
not the bad.
I'm looking. That's my point. Yeah. I'm looking for one bad move these guys have made since they've been in charge. I mean, progressive is the word I would use for where they've gone. The hires they've made have been progressive. The emphasis on development, progressive. The philosophy, progressive. The hire of Martin St. Louis, progressive.
But if I can, Eric, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about, did Bergevin leave them in a good spot? Yes, they've done great work in the last year.
No, he didn't.
He didn't.
He went for broke trying to get the Canadiens a Stanley Cup. He went for broke, and he did a lot of damage with some of those decisions because in the end they didn't win the cup. They only got to the final. And that's the risk you take in going all in. Like he
went all in.
At least he pushed his chips into the middle, man.
Yeah.
And, there was this residual damage that came with that. If people want to relitigate the Carey Price contract and why it was signed at the time, I mean, honestly, I would not have wanted to be the GM that traded Carey Price or let him walk for nothing coming off, what he did and what he was worth.
For individual awards, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that deal was... it's a no-brainer. Like there's no GM in the world that lets go of the best goaltender in the world.
No, but at the time,
it's a lot of money.
$10.5 million to a guy who's not going to play more than 57 games a year is a lot of money.
That's not the point. The point is if he hits the open market, he's signing for that or more. Like that's the bottom line. It's a moot point because if he hits the open market, that's what he's worth. He got signed for what he was worth, and he could have probably gotten more if there was a bidding war for his services. So in the end, did he leave the Canadiens in better hands? No, but his exit did pave the way for a couple of guys that have done really good work. And what I was saying is I'm looking for the bad move. And like the one with the most risk associated to it was Kirby Dach. And, judging by how that's going so far, it's a harbinger of probably some really good things to come.
It's the Canadiens and the San Jose Sharks tomorrow night at 7:00. Eric, you and I will talk again in about a week from today. Cool?
It sounds good. I don't even know where. I think I'll be in Vancouver.
Okay, so let me take a look at the Canadian schedule right now. The Canadiens host San Jose tomorrow. They will be in Calgary on Thursday. They'll be in Edmonton on Saturday. You're right. On Monday night, they're going to be in Vancouver. So you and I, chances are, we will not talk on Monday night. But you know what? They're going to be in Seattle on Tuesday. They're off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and maybe we can fit you in somewhere there, Eric. If not,
one of those days.
One of those days we'll fit you in. Thanks so much, Eric. Have a good one, buddy.
All right, take care.
All right, there you have it. Eric Engels of Sportsnet. Speaking of which, by the way, the Canadiens are in Calgary on Thursday night, okay? The game starts at 9 o'clock. I want to ask you, my sick army right now that are watching in big, big numbers, and thank you. If the Canadiens play that game in Calgary on Thursday, or when they play that game in Calgary on Thursday, not if they're going to play it, the game's probably going to be over at around 11:30. I have a question for Eastern time. I have a question for you. Do you want me to go on at 11:30 Eastern and bring you a sick podcast, or do you want me to go on at the regular 10 p.m. and at that point they're going to start the second period, and we'll start the second period together. We'll watch the game together. You'll have an eye on the screen and an eye on me, and we'll be talking about it, and I'll give you live reactions while the game is going on. I've never done this before. Never. Do you want me to do that? Do you want to watch the second period together? And who knows, maybe even end up watching the third period together. Maybe yes, maybe no. Or do you want me to go on at around 11:30 p.m. or whatever it is? Eh? Oh, someone says, why don't you go on at 10 a.m. the next morning? Should we do that? Should we go on at 10 a.m. the next morning? It's, oh, man. Yeah, I'm just not going to say anything. When we were thinking of going live, one of the first things that we wanted to do, one of the first things we discussed was actually going at 10 a.m. live. And then we thought about it, and we thought about a few different scenarios, and we decided that, a lot of people used to say, is it 10 a.m. yet? Is it 10 a.m. yet? Because they had to wait after the game for my reaction. We thought, what would be the next best thing, or what would be better than actually doing it at 10 a.m. And we figured it would be 10 p.m. So we decided on the 10 p.m. slot, and we hope you're enjoying the 10 p.m. slot. But you know what? I don't know. I'm gonna discuss it with Agnello and Sammy, but maybe Agnello, we can put it up on Twitter or something like that. We could probably put it up on Twitter, and we can say, hey, what do we do? Do we go on at 10 p.m., watch the second period together? Do we go on at 11:30 p.m., or do we go on at 10 a.m. the next day? And maybe, we'll do a poll, whatever. If we get more votes, we'll go with that. But it looks like most of you here have said 10 p.m., and let's watch it together. I discussed this with Agnello and Sammy earlier today at lunch. I said, guys, you want to do something different? Why don't we do this? And we said, you know what? We'll throw it out there tonight. And that's exactly what we did. We're going to talk soccer. I would have loved to talk about the Canadiens men's national team with John Limniadis, but it's going to have to be for another night. I know there's a pretty good chance that John's going to join us this week, as will Sandro Grande, both former professional players, both represented the Canadiens men's national team. Unfortunately for Canada, they ran into a tremendous midfield by the name of Modric, and by the name of Brozovic, and by the name of Kovacic. And they had a real hard time with it. And, they scored early. About 67 seconds into the game, Alphonso Davies scores Canada's first goal ever at the World Cup in terms of men's soccer. But once Croatia started going, Canada just couldn't seem to keep up. And we have a ways to go. It was a learning moment yesterday in the World Cup. There's no doubt about that. Why don't we talk about Go for Gold now? Let's do that. Go for Gold.
Go for Gold. A daily World Cup report.
Alphonso Davies keeps it himself. Goal!
Presented by Bijouterie Bassi.
Alphonso Davies.
Go for Gold is brought to you by Bijouterie Bassi. Bijouterie Bassi has provided professional service in fine jewelry for over 30 years. Visit the store at 9640 Boulevard Saint Michel in Montreal. Call them at 514-387-9528. I believe Agnello and I are planning on going by to say hello, if all goes well, on Thursday. So Thursday, if you're going to be in the area on Thursday morning and you see two people and one of them is good looking, well, it will be me in yellow, and I'll be the good looking one. Once upon a time, not anymore. All right, okay, all kidding aside, let's get down to business now, and let's talk to you about the day that was at the World Cup 2022. First game this morning, Cameroon and Serbia. This was absolutely unbelievable because Serbia got out to a 3-1 lead, and Cameroon scored like 2 goals like 3 minutes apart to tie it at 3. What an offensive festival that was. It was pretty amazing. Also, South Korea versus Ghana. This was awesome because Ghana took a 2-0 lead. South Korea came back to tie the game at 2, but then Ghana got a late winner. They win by a score of 3-2. Brazil versus Switzerland. Vinicius Jr. scores what he thought would have been a goal at the 64-minute mark, but they go to VAR, and it's offside, so that goal is called back. And then 19 minutes later, at the 83-minute mark, it's Casemiro with a strike. Brazil win by a score of 1-0, and they have advanced to the next round. Good for them. Portugal versus Uruguay. They get 2 goals by Bruno Fernandes, one off a curler and the other one off a penalty kick, and Portugal 2 advances. As far as games tomorrow, well, there's 4 games. There's going to be 2 games at 10 a.m. and 2 games at 2 p.m. So no more games at 5 o'clock in the morning. Here we go. At 10 a.m., Ecuador versus Senegal, and Netherlands versus Qatar. At 2 p.m., it's Iran versus USA, and Wales versus England. And we'll have our eyes on that. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. I know one thing, I really enjoyed bringing it to you. The Sick Podcast is brought to you in part by Energy Transportation Group, also by 8.6 Beer, and also by Lacage. Hit the like button, share it, tell your friends about it, talk to your friends about it. The bigger the Sick Army is, the better it is. We really appreciate it. If you go on Google Podcasts or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate it. We really love you. We hope you love us as well. I'm Marinaro. Have a great night, everyone. It's the Canadiens versus the Sharks tomorrow night. It's a 7 o'clock start, and I'll bring you the Sick Podcast. Same time, same place, 10 p.m. Eastern. Ciao.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by Energy Transportation Group, driven to be different, 8.6, intense by nature, and La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.